Well, greetings all. I hope everybody's safe and sound in their bunkers. Eric and I are still here, though, broadcasting live from the bunker that we have our own apartments and houses. so
Yeah,
we're inside. So Eric, I trust you're safe.
I am. I am
Okay,
safe and well.
well, I'm one of the elderly, so I'm going to try and get through this and see what happens. So we're starting new material today. This is the segment reporting part. We're going into chapter 11 if you're following along in your hymnals, and so that's kind of our approach. And we're trying to set a transition between the variable costing income statements that we've had and where we're going, which is some short-term decision making. And so it would be helpful to think about organizations in a little bit different way. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on segment reporting and see where that takes us. But we wanted to introduce it today and see some of the basics of it and how it
Mhm.
might link back to some of the material that we've had before. So with that, one of the things that you think about initially is what the heck is a segment and why would we need to report on it? And so I'll start off and say everything we've done at this point has really been on an aggregate basis. We had one income statement for one period of time. We didn't necessarily think about the individual product lines that they were working with. Now I'll go back and say, yes, we did product mix when we were doing some break even. But even with that, we didn't look at the profitability of an individual product. Remember, it was all merged together
Yep.
in a weighted average contribution margin. So now what we're trying to do, though, is kind of fill out that segment, whatever those things might be. So Eric, why don't you take us through, since you've had more experience in this area of working in segments and divisional reporting, why don't you take us through this section and give us some of your insight?
Sure. Well, I think you gave a really good synopsis of it. And
Hooray for me!
back in my day, back in the stone, I actually worked in corporate. I worked for a company that had it was just a conglomerate. So my product line was similar to music, like elevator music. So and this company had thousands of products.
It was
So
old. It was old person Spotify.
yes,
All right, got it.
yeah, right. So our my group, my manager was not as concerned about the entire organization as she was about her particular segment and division
Oh,
performance.
okay. All right.
So so we had she was more in your example, she would be more of a regional manager because we had more than one product line under her.
Oh, okay. So did this
But
did this create competition between these managers?
you know, it did with regard to not similar to performance. I mean, I'm sure there were
Okay.
bonuses that are finite that they competed for. That was above my grade level. But
Yeah. So I think
the
that's one of the
competition,
issues when we talk about segments is that once you break your company up into different reporting entities, they start to compete. And so
yes,
you may get some unusual behaviors
yeah.
based on the way that we make that decision. So
You
take
know,
us again. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was going to say, I was a really young accountant, fresh out of school when I first got there, and I noticed that during the overhead allocation discussions, I didn't know why that was so heated, but that was heated because it had an effect on their bottom line.
I'm telling you, accounting, heated
Yes.
conversations. So you talked about a product line manager. This is pretty applicable to any of our students who are thinking about marketing as a major because this is often a place where you get into organizations where you might be running or participating in a specific product line. Regional manager you talked about. So this one we kind of set up in tends to be geographic. There could be other ways to set it up. And then what's a branch manager?
Branch manager would kind of be like a particular manager of a restaurant chain or something.
Oh, okay. So, so like the Brennan restaurant chain, they've got Dickie Brennan Steakhouse, but then they've also got the Palace Cafe. They've got the Bourbon House, and there's a
Correct.
manager
Right.
over each of those operations. I
Right.
think of it a little bit as a bank manager. Every bank
Right.
has
Yes.
some independent responsibilities, so
Yes.
that's part. Now, do these different managers have different responsibilities in their area? I hope
Yeah. It
so
depends.
because I've listed three.
Yeah. Yes. It just kind of depends on what their particular responsibilities are, and that's key. That the manager should be held accountable for only those things that they control. So
Okay, so go over that again because that's what we call the accountability.
yes, yeah, the manager should not be accountable for segments that they have no influence over.
Okay, so it comes down to control. Can you
Yes,
control the decision? All right.
right,
So so then let's talk about these three in that context.
right. So a cost center would be, let's say, uh, IT support or custodial support. They don't generate any revenue, but they have control to control certain costs, to contain certain costs. So they wouldn't be, they should not be held accountable for any revenue generation at all. They should be held accountable just for their cost control performance.
Okay.
And
Then the
a
profit
profit
centers.
a profit center is it's like, as you mentioned, it's income focused. That would be, I at a loss right now, but that would be someone who a
So it could be
sales
like
a
it
sales
could be like
organization.
that. It could be like the branch manager in a bank or a restaurant manager, where they're responsible for the revenue line and the cost of delivering the service,
Yeah,
but they have inherited the facility
right.
that they're working in, so they may not have control over those kind of investment decisions.
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
so then that takes us down to the most complex,
Right.
which is the
And that's
investment
corporate.
center. Yeah, okay,
That's
that's
an
another way to
executive.
look at it.
Yeah, that's a corporate executive function.
Okay, and so and the differentiator here is they can make a decision about the kinds of equipment they want, facilities they work in, those kind of investment management decisions. So,
Correct.
and not every one of these segments may have that kind of responsibility. So,
Exactly. Exactly.
okay, so let's take a look at the next thing. And what I'm trying to do with these is to make sure that we link you back to the work you've already seen. And
Mhm.
so this is nothing more than your variable costing income statement that we've dealt with most of the semester. And you've got sales variable expenses, contribution margin, fixed expenses, and net income. And you've got the units and the per unit and the totals. For me, in my classes, I use this acronym to describe it. The income statement, SV Comfini. SV Comfini. That's Swedish for variable costing income statement. And this is your contribution margin percentage. So those are things we've always had. But remember, these amounts, these per unit amounts are aggregate. They reflect just an average or a total of whatever sold. And this is just an overall company look. Then the
Right.
next thing we did when we went into the flexible budgets and actual results is we expanded that look at the variable expenses to include the three: direct material, direct labor, and variable overhead. And then we did some variances on that. But ultimately, the issue here was to think about how do we control, how do we analyze these variable expenses. And so then that leaves us, though, with a whole bunch of fixed expenses just sitting here. And up to this point, we really haven't dealt with it. And so uh, A lot of people would like to know about that, right, Eric? So,
Yes, sure.
what kind of things do you think about when you're talking about fixed expenses? Because right now it just looks like this lump sum that nobody. If I go back to your controllability, your accountability principle, how do we know who's responsible for the 450?
Well, it depends. Yeah, again, that is a responsibility issue, and it depends on what the manager's responsibilities are. So you have things like, rent or leasing costs, but a huge fixed cost that is generally under management's purview is depreciation, particularly in a manufacturing setting. So in a manufacturing setting, if you have some equipment that the manager that particular manager has control over, then that depreciation will fall under that manager's bottom line.
Okay, I've kind of
Uh,
messed up. I've kind of messed up our screen. So sorry about that, everybody. But
we're all good.
so now I've got. Hold on just a second. Let me try one more thing because I can't get my pen to work. Oh, it's us again.
Ah,
So let's try this and see what happens. I think I'm better now. I think oh, still not making the magic happen. So let's just talk about the traceable and the non-traceable real quick. And while you're talking about that, I'll try this one more time.
yeah. So traceable costs are those costs that are directly traced to a unit or a segment, and so that unit or that segment has those costs that are just germane to that particular activity, and they often can be eliminated if that segment goes away.
Okay. So
And not
go ahead.
Yeah, the non-traceable costs are just general administrative overhead costs that will be there regardless of whether that segment remains or not. If that segment does go away, then those costs are just reallocated.
Okay. So the traceable, that implies accountability. The non-traceable implies that it's there kind of to support these managers that are making their decision, but they're not the ones that are defining what it's going to be.
Correct.
So, all right. So let's see if we can move to. Obviously, I can't move. So, uh, boy, have I got this thing messed up now. So let me try one more thing here.
Mhm.
I'm gonna have to go back all the way to uh, my original PowerPoint and see where that takes me. Uh, and so don't give up on me yet. We'll try to make this happen.
No, we're all good, man.
Okay, I think I may have a shot. I may have a shot at this now. So let's see where I am at this point. So hold on, I'm coming back. I'm trying to come back here, and let's see what happens. Yay!
Yes, we're good. We're
Uh,
good.
yeah, this is what happens when you let an elderly person onto the screen. Let's go ahead and give them a little bit of what the numbers might look like, because the challenge here is this idea of margins. So we got a
Yeah.
whole bunch of different margins here, margin, 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 and you have to be fairly precise with what those things are. So why don't you take us down through those and let's see what we're working with. And then
Yeah.
also describe the kinds of fixed expenses that affect it.
Sure, sure. Okay, now contribution margin, we beat that up pretty well throughout the semester, and
Mm-hmm.
that shows you how leveraged you are relative to other segments of your organization. And so mechanically, all of these, mathematically, all of these margins work exactly the same. They are the margin as a percentage of sales.
Okay,
So
so like this one was 25. I got the 25% by taking the 500,000 divided by the 2 million,
yes,
and the same works once I get down to here, because then
correct,
all I'm doing is taking the 200,000 divided by the 2 million.
correct.
Okay, so that's where the percentages come from. They're always a percent of sales. So,
Right. Yeah.
all
So
right.
that's the mathematical piece. That's pretty straightforward, and you've done this several times in class. So now, what do they mean? We've discussed the contribution margin. That's after after fixed costs are covered, that every dollar contribution margin goes directly to profit. I mean, it always goes directly to profit, but you can see it more easily once fixed costs are covered. So our segment margin performance is that's the contribution margin minus the fixed expenses that are traceable and controllable. So that directly relates to the manager's activities. So that manager has controlled or has influenced those fixed costs.
Oh, okay. All right. So we were letting them off the hook before by just looking at the variable. Now we're saying some of these fixed expenses you're actually responsible for.
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
So,
and so that segment performance is a very good measure of management performance.
okay. All right. So that's the focus there. Now we've got, oh man, we got another margin. So
Yeah. So
what gets me to that one?
but a segment margin includes those fixed costs that are outside of management. So those corporate executive costs that are just allocated,
That are
uh,
not controllable to these folks?
not controllable at all. Management
Okay.
has the segment manager has no say in that.
So this might go back to your idea of rent, right? I mean, you may be able to know specifically the rent for some location that your
Right.
company's operating in, but that contract might have been set up by somebody else, not this manager. So I can identify it, so it's traceable to the segment, but not controllable by the manager. Is that fair?
That is very fair, and I was, I alluded to it earlier
Right,
about
right.
the arguments that happen for management allocation. I'm 2 feet bigger than you, yeah, but I
Yeah,
have
that happens a
employees.
lot
You
at
have one.
that happens a lot in doctors' offices when they're sharing offices and sharing
Yes,
office
yes,
space. They can get pretty fired up about how much square footage they've got versus the rent that they're having to share. So what? There's the big finish. This is something called a common um, expense, and you had talked about that earlier as perhaps being like an IT or human resources, maybe. Um, so they're the overall kinds of fixed expenses. Is that what you were saying?
right, sure, yeah. So that spreads across all the organizations,
Okay.
and so with that in mind, there's again that is outside of the segment manager's purview,
Okay.
and that's just kind of added, not added on, but that's an expense they have no control over whatsoever.
So one of the things that you talk about, which is really important, is everything below this line right here. Okay. This is not controlled by the manager. And so
Yes.
while we might look at their profitability, there could be situations where there's a lot of other expenses in here that affect their profitability, but they can't control it. So you need to be aware of what Eric says, that controllability or that accountability principle, because it flows through this whole process. So
Yes.
get ready, because here comes the other expansion. Okay. Oh my. So we've got a lot of numbers here. And so first, let's kind of talk about the structure. And Eric, you kind of talk about how the different segments work together. And so you've already seen us expand our income statement vertically, but now we've expanded it horizontally. And we're saying of that total company operation, we've got three segments. We've got a North segment, we got a West segment, and we got a Kanye segment. Now, that's an attempt by me to have some street cred with young people. But more importantly, my grandfather's actual name was Northwest. So I sneak it in there every time because I think it's funny. But so tell us a little bit about when you look at this, what do you see, Eric?
Well, the first thing I see is that North has the lion's share of the sales.
Okay, so when you
Sales organization.
so you're looking across this sales line, and you're saying of that 2 million, North has half of it. So you're
Right.
looking at sales mix first, right?
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly.
and so poor Kanye is sitting over here with 400,000, and deciding whether or not he needs to drop a new album. Okay,
Yeah.
or clothing line. So then
Right.
what's next?
Yeah. So the looking at the contribution margin to
Okay.
see
So what we had seen
sales.
before was for the company as a whole, it was 25%. But
Hmm.
now what do you see?
Well, individually, North has a 30% contribution margin, and
Oh,
are at 20%.
okay.
So the total corporation doesn't really give you the full picture.
Okay. So now as a manager, I start taking that 25% apart and kind of look at these individual pieces. Now, what else do you think about? I mean, both Kanye and West have 20% contribution margins, but their absolute dollars are different. Um, what does that tell you as a manager, or if anything?
That's why the first thing I looked at was what was the sales percentage uh,
Oh, okay. All right.
of the total. So the raw numbers, the raw contribution margin numbers are useful, but they don't carry as much independent information as when you look at them all together.
Oh, okay. All right. That's cool. So if we move down now to the segment performance margin, what do you see down there?
Well, I see that the segment performance margin is at 14% for North is that's actually pretty good relative to the other.
All right, North. All right.
Yeah.
And so then what?
So you know that you would expect the segment performance margin uh, numbers the total to be larger because they have a larger sales percentage.
So
But
just on the scale, we got a scale that's affecting North in terms of just absolute dollars.
right,
Okay.
right. But that segment performance margin percentage shows that the manager is actually affecting that in a positive way.
Oh, okay. All right. So what about our other two segments?
The other two segments are not quite as robust.
Oh, robust. Excellent
I'll be
use of the word.
kind.
All right. You're
I'll
very
be-
nice. You're a very nice guy.
so, yeah.
So what, in terms of not as robust, which ones are less robust than others?
Kanye is pretty,
Ooh, taking a hit.
Kanye's pretty weak.
He's got a real problem now because he was at least even with West up here, but
Yeah,
now based on the fixed expenses that Kanye division controls, we've only got a 3% segment performance margin. So this one would look like probably in last place. Is that fair?
yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Sure. Sure.
And
Yeah.
so, but again, if we had to rank them, you'd probably go with North is doing the best, and West is somewhere in the middle, and Kanye is somewhere over here,
Absolutely.
trending uh, downward. So
Yes.
then we go to our segment margin, and what does that do for me in terms of
So now,
analysis?
now we have not controllable traceable expenses
Okay, all right.
that are necessary for those divisions, but the managers can't control those at all.
Okay. And
Um,
so the result in terms of segment margins are,
yeah, the actually West is has a better segment margin
yep. So West
percentage.
somehow, yeah, West somehow elevated their performance uh, compared to where North is and where Kanye is. And
Correct.
so the challenge here is, okay, West as a manager is going to talk about how wonderful they're doing in terms of segment margin. The
Hmm.
challenge though is how much of all of these non-controllable expenses are being assigned to North. I mean, that's a huge number of 100 compared to 18,000 for West and
Right.
only 2,000 for Kanye.
Right.
So if they'd gotten anywhere even, I mean, Conway would be losing money, and this 30,000 certainly wouldn't be the 5% certainly wouldn't be as good, and North would be better off. So this line becomes really important in terms of overall evaluation of how the company is performing.
Right. Right. So if I am North, I am arguing my segment performance margin is dominant. And
Yes,
that's why I deserve the bonus. And if I'm
yes.
West, I am arguing that the segment margin is should be the most important, you know, and I'm out I am
Yeah.
peers. And if I'm
So
Kanye, I'm kind of like staying in the corner, just not trying to say
I'm
much.
not. Yeah, I'm not going to any meetings. I'm not.
Right.
I'm staying home in quarantine. So that's that part. All right. Well, I think that was kind of the highlights of what we were after here. And then the next piece we're going to do is a DuPont analysis, and that's going to be a different video.
Yep.
So everybody, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your willingness to tolerate my technical glitches as I try to get more comfortable with this. Eric, another great job, and we will check with you guys a little bit later. So hang in there and stay healthy.
See you soon.